Good morning, everyone. Call this hearing to order. Happy St. Patrick's Day. This is our first subcommittee on contracting and workforce of the 114th Congress. I'm happy to welcome Ranking Member Nadia Velazquez. I'm sure we're going to do important work together in the next couple of years. As Chairman Chabot stated in his hearing of February 12, 2015, having a healthy and small business industrial base means that taxpayers benefit from increased competition, innovation, and job creation. However, the testimony received by the committee last month indicates that our small business technology and industrial base is at risk. While the percentage of prime contracting dollars awarded to small businesses is increasing, the number of small businesses seeking contracts with the federal government has fallen by over 100,000 since 2012. In the past 4 years, the number of contract actions with small businesses has fallen by 60%, and at the Department of Defense, the number of contract actions fell by almost 70%. The size and average of individual small contract actions increased by 230% that same period and nearly 290% at the DoD. Percentage of subcontract work going to small businesses has fallen under all those circumstances by 2.5%. All of this data indicates that small businesses are at risk, yet the Small Business Administration gave the federal government, and this is a mystery, an A on its latest small business procurement scorecard. Today, we will examine how the government can be receiving a superlative grade when half of the dollar-based goals are not met. Bundling and consolidation are increasing, small business subcontracting is decreasing, and the size standards are being manipulated. Today's witnesses are going to address specific recommendations to improve the competitive viability of our small business contractors. This is the second of a series of hearings we'll be having on this topic. We will be back here in a couple of days, next Thursday. I expect that as a result of the testimony received today, the subcommittee will actively pursue ways to increase opportunities for small businesses to compete for contracts. I look forward to working with each of you and hearing your testimony. I now yield to Ranking Member Velazquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this valuable hearing. As this committee seeks ways to foster small business growth and expansion, we must always carefully consider what is being done to maximize entrepreneurs' participation in the federal marketplace. As we all know, when small companies are awarded federal contracts, the result is a win-win. Small businesses provide quality goods and services at affordable prices, meaning a better deal for the government and the taxpayer. At the same time, it can mean significant growth opportunity for small businesses and even the need to hire new employees. With these benefits in mind, Congress and this committee in particular have long worked to ensure small businesses receive their fair share of federal contracts. There has been some progress in this regard. In fiscal year 2013, the federal government finally met its statutory goal of providing 23% of federal contracting dollars to small enterprises. For fiscal year 2014, it appears as much as 25% of federal contracting dollars may flow to small companies. While this represents an improvement over previous years, when these goals were unmet, much work remains. For example, there continue to be reports of ineligible businesses receiving small business contracting dollars. Additionally, the scorecards issued by the Small Business Administration have been questioned as agencies continue to receive high grades despite failing to meet all of their small business goals. With budgets tight and spending reduced due to the ill-advised policy of sequestration, there are simply fewer procurement actions to go around. This means it is more important than ever that agencies are doing everything possible to ensure legitimate small companies can tap into the suitable federal business opportunities. One long-standing barrier to small business participation in the federal marketplace has been the practice of contract bundling. When federal agencies group smaller procurement actions together, they reduce competition by making projects too large for small companies to bid on. Publicly available data suggests that for every $100 worth of federal work that is bundled, small firms lose $33 in revenue. Unfortunately, this practice is widespread. In fiscal year 2013, it was estimated that over $107 billion was awarded through consolidated or bundled contracts. That means small companies miss out on $35 billion worth of contracting opportunity. Considering the prevalence of this problem, it is vital we ensure the SBA is doing everything possible to prevent unnecessary bundling. This raises a number of important oversight questions for the committee, including whether the SBA has sufficient staff to monitor contracting actions and whether the agency is aggressive enough in challenging bundled contracts. Given how few contracts have been unbundled, the answer to both these questions will appear to be no. Today's hearing will also touch on the jurisdiction of the SBA's Office of Hearing and Appeals. This office has been integral to ensuring only legitimate firms receive small business contracts. As a result of their consistent work, some have called for increases to OHA's jurisdiction. However, the office, like many other parts of the agency, remains understaffed, and it is unclear how this will affect its caseload. Mr. Chairman, with overall government expenditures declining, the pool of contracts for small businesses to bid on will only further shrink in coming years. Given this phenomenon, it is all the more critical that this committee and the SBA work to remove barriers that prevent small firms from winning federal contracts. I look forward to hearing the witnesses' perspective on how we can best accomplish that task and yield back the balance of my time, but I would like to take a moment to say to all of you, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Our first witness today is Joe Wynn, the president of Vets Group, a nonprofit organization that provides entrepreneurial education, federal procurement training, employment assistance, and other supportive services primarily for veterans, people with disabilities, and people with limited means. He is testifying on behalf of the Veterans Entrepreneur Task Force, also known as VetForce, which is composed of over 200 organizations and affiliates representing thousands of veterans throughout the United States, and which monitors the impact of legislation on the veterans procurement programs. Sitting next to him is Rob Burton, a partner with the Venerable LPP. Mr. Burton is a former Deputy Administrator for Federal Procurement Policy. He has also spent over 20 years as Senior Acquisition Attorney with the Department of Defense. Our third witness is Alan Shvatkin, Executive Vice President and Counsel for the Professional Services Council. Mr. Shvatkin previously served as Counsel and Staff Director to the Senate Small Business Committee and Counsel to the Senate Armed Services Committee. I yield to Ranking Member Velazquez to introduce our fourth witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is my pleasure to introduce to the committee Mr. Damien Specht. He is a partner at Jenner & Block, LLP, here in Washington, D.C., where he represents clients in all facets of government contracting matters and is the co-chair of the firm's Government Contracts Corporate Transactions Group. Additionally, he serves as a co-chair of the ABA's Small Business and Other Socio-Economic Programs Committee and has been a speaker and author on numerous small business topics. He was also named a Washington, D.C. Super Lawyer Rising Star for Government Contracts in 2014. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Wynn, 5 minutes. We want to hear what you have to say, so be lenient, but you know how it works, so go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Velazquez. On behalf of VetForce, VBA, and myself as an Air Force veteran, I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you here today. Over the years, VetForce has been voluntarily conducting oversight of the legislation, regulations, policies, programs intended to improve and increase the contract opportunities for veterans-owned businesses. When we come to know what's not working, we do not hesitate to bring that to the attention of the military departments, federal agencies, or to you, the members of Congress. Through VetForce, we've also come to know that the federal small business procurement process is not only unkind to businesses owned by veterans, but is negatively impacting all small business groups, 8A, HUBZone, women-owned as well. In my testimony here today, I will highlight the impact of federal contract bundling and consolidation through the use of federal strategic sourcing initiatives on veteran and other small businesses. Many small businesses are struggling in the federal marketplace. New U.S. trade policies and changes in how contracts are competed and awarded have made it more difficult for small businesses to compete against and work with large prime contractors. In recent years, the government has been actively promoting the use of federal strategic sourcing initiatives in an effort to consolidate procurements. However, to us, the small business owner, federal strategic sourcing initiatives is just a more clever way of contract bundling. VetForce is concerned that by relying so heavily on a few large prime contractors, our country makes itself vulnerable to a catastrophic interruption in services and a lack of competitiveness, innovation, and imagination that small businesses provide. All federal agencies are supposed to identify if a contract is bundled or consolidated. There's a dollar threshold per agency and certain criteria used to make this determination. And achieving reductions in administrative or personnel costs alone is not enough. In addition, there should be an assessment done to determine the impact on small businesses. But who within the procurement process actually makes this determination, and once determined, what happens? Agencies are required to provide the SBA's Procurement Center Representative, PCR, and the agency's own OSDBU with a statement explaining why the procurement has to be bundled. If the PCR objects to the agency's rationale, the PCR can delay the procurement while SBA and the agency negotiate, although the agency will ultimately make the decision whether to move forward with the procurement as is or change the requirements. This process of checking the requirements by the PCR is not only flawed, but by the mere fact that SBA has decreased the number of PCRs to about 50, it's highly unlikely that these few persons will be able to review thousands of procurements throughout the entire federal government. For years, administrations have attempted to streamline its policies in an effort to reduce costs and save taxpayer dollars. Reducing government employees has been one method that has been used a lot. In the 90s, an estimated 15,000 government procurement positions were eliminated. So where then are we headed with federal strategic sourcing initiatives? While the policy may be endorsed and promoted by OMB and this and previous administrations, what has been and will continue to be the adverse impact on small businesses? GSA, for example, has several strategic sourcing vehicles that it uses. It awarded in one the janitorial sanitation supply vehicle, 18 companies, 15 of which were very small businesses. However, these services were previously provided by 609 companies, 540 of which were small businesses. So that means that 525 small businesses will no longer be allowed to compete for federal contracts for janitorial services and supplies. They have other contracts that work similarly in fashion and are displacing many, many small businesses. Finally, small businesses competing for government contracts find themselves at a disadvantage in the federal marketplace and appear to be losing ground all the time. Large contractors have been awarded most of the bundled contracts with little to no repercussions for not including small companies in their subcontracting plans. And under federal strategic sourcing initiatives, a few small businesses will no doubt grow and prosper if they are one of the lucky few selected. But it's clear to see just from the math that there's definitely an adverse impact to far more small businesses. What about really cutting costs and boosting growth among the majority of our nation's small business taxpayers and their families, and not just for a few and this entity called the government? Let's secure our industrial base and the future of America. This concludes my statement, and I hope that I can answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Mr. Burton, you may begin.
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today and discuss the growing decline of small business participation in Federal procurements. Specifically, I would like to address the need to strengthen the Federal contract consolidation and bundling regulations and provide several other recommendations for protecting small business interests in Federal procurements. First, let me turn to the consolidation and bundling regulations. These regulations were designed to protect small businesses, but in practice, agencies have failed to fully implement and comply with these important regulations. For example, agencies are required to, 1, provide a written determination that the use of a bundled or consolidated contract is justified, 2, report to SBA on the usage of bundled contracts, and 3, publicize or post the justifications for bundled procurements in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, in the wake of a significant increase in consolidated and bundled contracts in the U.S. government, agencies have routinely failed to follow these basic requirements. Moreover, there are currently no regulatory requirements to post the written justifications for consolidated contracts or report data on consolidated contracts. The posting and reporting requirements are limited to only bundled contracts. Consequently, in my opinion, agencies are inclined to use consolidated contracts and are reluctant to ever categorize a consolidated procurement as a bundled contract, which is defined by the Small Business Act as a type of consolidated contract that is likely to be unsuitable for award to a small business. Consolidated contracts are generally suitable for award to small businesses, but there is little transparency into the growing number of these procurements. For example, on several occasions, I have submitted a Freedom of Information Act request on behalf of small business clients for the written justification supporting the use of consolidated contracts, only to find that the justifications do not exist. It is imperative that agencies comply with the requirement for written justifications and that the justifications be publicized and posted on agency websites. Offerors, including small businesses, need advance notice of a contract that will be bundled or consolidated. This is critical because an offeror may only challenge unjustified bundling and consolidation at the GAO prior to contract award. Therefore, agencies should post their justifications for both bundled and consolidated contracts concurrent with or prior to the release of the solicitations. Simply put, an agency's failure to timely publicize the written justifications precludes small businesses from challenging consolidated procurements. To further strengthen small business participation in Federal procurements, I recommend that SBA reports more thoroughly on the impact of bundling and consolidation on the small business industrial base by aligning SBA's scorecard methodology with the types of goaling provided for in the Small Business Act. Thus, instead of just reporting on agency procurement dollars going to small businesses, SBA should report on agency success in meeting 1, industrial goals, which ensure the participation of small businesses from each industry category in agency contracts and subcontracts, and 2, utilization goals, which ensure that each type of small business, such as a women-owned or service-disabled veteran-owned small business, has the maximum practical opportunity to participate in the performance of agency contracts and subcontracts. These two small business goals, the industrial and utilization goals, recognize that simply looking at the dollars awarded to small businesses does not by itself ensure that small businesses are fairly represented in Federal procurement. Turning now to organizational changes that could strengthen small business participation, I recommend that Congress consider establishing the Small Business Administration Office of Hearings and Appeals, referred to as OHA, in statute, and giving it total independence from SBA. Currently, OHA reviews certain SBA program decisions, such as 8A and size determinations. However, If Congress established OHA as a totally independent body, it could also give it review authority over SBA's establishment and modification of size standards. Such authority for OHA would be particularly beneficial for small businesses who are currently unable to challenge the size standards, except by filing a lawsuit in Federal court, which is extraordinarily expensive and simply an unrealistic option. Finally, I recommend that Congress consider adding the Small Business Administration to the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, referred to as the FAR Council. The FAR Council has yet to implement several provisions of the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, which are designed to increase small business participation. I think the addition of SBA to the FAR Council could streamline and expedite the implementation process, allow for better coordination between SBA and the current agency members of the FAR Council, and perhaps facilitate concurrent rulemaking. I recall when I chaired the FAR Council, it was extremely difficult to coordinate the FAR and SBA rulemaking processes. In many cases, the FAR and SBA regulations cover the same procurement topics and have government-wide impact. Consequently, the need for close coordination and communication between the two rulemaking bodies is critical, and SBA's membership on the FAR Council would certainly facilitate the needed communication. In summary, it is critical for Congress to strengthen the consolidation and bundling regulations and ensure agency compliance with these regulations. In addition, Congress can expand the role of OHA and develop more meaningful and robust small business goals for the Federal agencies. These legislative actions will undoubtedly protect small business interests and the future of the small business industrial base. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my statement. I will be pleased to answer any questions that you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. Just by way of information, Grace Meng had an amendment to the NDAA that passed the House last year that did at least part of what you are requesting. It requires agencies to publish justification with the solicitation. So those are the kinds of things we are talking about going forward with. Mr. Shabbat, you may begin.
Chairman Hanna, Mr. Velasquez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. PSC is a strong supporter of a balanced Federal policy on small business. My testimony, I address 4 important issues. First, on strategic sourcing. Strategic sourcing is not suitable for all of the government's acquisitions. Our association is a strong proponent of well-designed strategic sourcing programs, as well as establishing and maintaining a strong industrial base, not just for small businesses, but for businesses of all size. When considering the Federal Government's move towards a strategic sourcing and its interrelationship with small business contracting goals, it is clear that there are disconnects driven largely by how the Federal Government measures small business performance in the Federal market and the desire to foster a strong industrial base. In 2013, PSC President and CEO Stan Soloway testified before this subcommittee about strategic sourcing and its impact on the industrial base. Then, as now, our view of strategic sourcing is centered on supporting an environment of robust competition, high performance, agility, innovation, and balanced opportunities for companies of all sizes. We recommended then and again today that the Federal Government must better align the number of small business providers and the total dollar value expended via small businesses as part of its overall strategic sourcing strategy. But it is also clear that improved data collection and analysis is necessary to improve future decision-making. The data today fails to consider whether there is an equitable distribution among small businesses and a balanced reliance on small business for certain categories of work. With respect to the imbalance in goal setting and small business attainment, as you well know, SBA negotiates biennially with the Federal agencies on their small business attainment goals for both prime contract awards from the Federal agencies and for subcontracting goals to be achieved by Federal prime contractors. While SBA is agnostic on how an agency achieves its goals, we have seen how agencies have skewered their performance to focus on some of the low-hanging fruit within their business opportunities and not looked across their entire enterprise for meaningful small business participation. As a result, agencies are, in effect, picking winners and losers in the small business market and in the agency's larger industrial-based market through these small business goal attainment decisions. Therefore, in the goal-setting process, SBA and the agencies must evaluate not only top-line small business goals, but also analyze and comment on changes in the agency's business base and addressable market. Consideration should be given to setting goals for services and commodities to be sure that one segment of an agency's market is not drawing a disproportionate share of the agency's attainment efforts. With respect to data quality, in order to make informed decisions about Federal small business contracting, better data that captures the full participation across the Federal marketplace is necessary. While Federal small business prime contracting expenditures in the aggregate are fairly accurate, to the same level that any other data is accurate in the Federal marketplace, there is significantly less visibility into small business participation at the subcontracting level. PSC strongly believes that without meaningful data that can be used to provide an accurate picture of total small business participation, government risks making ill-informed small business contracting decisions that could place significant risk on small business contractors and could damage the larger industrial base. Finally, it has been a challenge to understand the impact of all of the regulatory actions on Federal acquisition and on small businesses when the private sector is forced to comment on rules in piecemeal fashion. These rolling regulatory issuances create a challenge for analysis and commentary on the impact of any single rule on the overall regulatory scheme and how they will affect the market. Notwithstanding congressional interest and sometimes direction that implementing rules be issued within a reasonable period of time, as Mr. Burton said, we are still waiting for some final rules for key provisions of the 2010 Small Business Jobs Act, and that is unacceptable. We therefore make the following recommendations. First, more needs to be done to improve the data reporting to track Federal prime and subcontract data. This is a significant challenge that will require close coordination between industry and government. Second, in the goal-setting process, SBA and the agencies must evaluate not only top-line small business goals, but also analyze and comment on changes in the agency's business base and addressable market. Consideration should be given to setting target goals for services and commodities to be sure that no one segment of an agency's market is drawing a disproportionate share of the agency's attainment. Third, agencies must fully implement and then comply with both the bundling and the consolidation reporting requirements that have been enacted. And finally, the viability of conducting past performance assessments of first-tier subcontractors should be thoroughly explored. Thank you again for the invitation. We look forward to continuing our long-standing work with this committee, and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Mr. Specht.
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Velazquez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to appear today. In my testimony, I will address how consolidated contracting necessarily limits the number of small businesses in the Federal marketplace. I will also briefly discuss the SBA's rating methodology and, as a litigator who appears before the SBA Office of Hearings and Appeals, share some thoughts on that forum. From tool manufacturers to those working in support of our intelligence agencies, I have heard that bundling is a problem. However, because we largely rely on self-reporting, the government has little reliable data on where bundling is occurring and how many small businesses are being hurt by this practice. As a result, I join Mr. Burton in encouraging this committee to require agencies to publish bundling justifications along with solicitations. This will allow small businesses to understand the agency's rationale and, if necessary, timely protest the bundled requirement. I will note, however, that bundling protests are rarely successful. In fact, it appears the primary way for an agency to lose a bundling protest is to fail to perform any analysis at all. As a result, in addition to increasing transparency, this committee should consider raising the bar for justifying these decisions, which can currently be based on as little as 5% cost savings. In addition to bundling, this committee should be highly skeptical of strategic sourcing initiatives. Strategic sourcing proponents have worked to maximize small business participation. That effort is commendable. But the problem is not one of intent or lack of effort. The problem is that strategic sourcing, at least when accomplished through large contract vehicles, is necessarily bad for the diversity of small contractors in the industrial base. This is the case for a few reasons. First, the large number of items to be provided on each of these contracts make it impossible for many businesses to bid. As demonstrated by the FSSI office supplies contract, it is often necessary for hundreds of small businesses to team together to fulfill the requirements of a single contract. A second negative consequence of strategic sourcing is that those businesses that do not receive awards will find other contract opportunities disappear. To drive volume discounts, purchasing from strategic sourcing vehicles must be highly encouraged. That means that sales that would have gone to hundreds of small businesses are now focused on a dozen. This concentration of awards has a real impact. In fact, one of my small business clients recently told me that their sales volume has decreased by 2/3 since they were not chosen for a strategic sourcing award. A third problem with strategic sourcing is that it reduces the importance of federal supply schedule contracts. Traditionally, GSA's FSS programs provided an access point for aspiring contractors. If we choose to shift the government's purchases to strategic sourcing contracts and away from the remaining FSS holders, this entry point will be less attractive, and we will lose a significant number of future contractors. Ironically, the award of a strategic sourcing contract is not always a benefit to the winners. This is the case because large awards can set up a hill and valley problem. A small business that receives millions in strategic sourcing awards is likely to expand its infrastructure to meet those needs. However, that firm's dependence on a single contract will backfire if it loses the next competition. In the past, this concern was mitigated because businesses received more regular but smaller awards. In summary, there is nothing wrong with strategic sourcing. However, this committee needs to look beneath the surface to judge whether these actions are consistent with building a diverse small business base. Despite the impact of bundling and consolidation, the federal government met its overall small business goals in 2013 and apparently 2014. These are not minor achievements. This accomplishment is tempered by concerns that large contractors are being counted towards small business goals. Although this may be the result of honest mistakes, continued training of contracting officers and explanation of the complicated small business rules to the contracting community will be helpful in confirming that the proper numbers are being reported. Further, this committee should be concerned that SBA assigned an A or A+ rating to 20 agencies when none met all their small business goals. One of those agencies, the Department of the Treasury, was assigned an A rating despite a small business subcontracting rate of 6.8%. As this grade inflation demonstrates, this committee should continue to closely examine the basis for SBA's grades to determine where agency performance can be improved. Shifting to my role as a small business litigator, I'd like to address some of the issues related to SBA's Office of Hearings and Appeals, or OHA. Although I do not agree with every OHA decision, it has proven to be an efficient alternative to federal court. As a result, I support making OHA permanent through statute. Any such statute should, of course, recognize that small businesses may appeal OHA decisions to federal court if they so choose. This committee should also act to eliminate a redundancy in the Small Business Act. Specifically, although OHA's administrative judges have significant expertise, the Small Business Act assigns certain appeals to administrative law judges, of which OHA has none. This has led ALJs at other agencies to hear small business cases on behalf of OHA. Although I have no doubt this arrangement is effective, it makes more sense to centralize small business decisions in OHA as a statutory entity. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, and I yield to Ranking Member Velazquez for the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wynn, despite the numerous safeguards in place, we continue to see the bundling and consolidation of contracts. In your opinion, what is going to take to let these agencies know that the consolidation or bundling of contracts is not to be used to ease administrative burden?
Thank you for the question. As was noted and mentioned in my comments, one of the mechanisms that is being used right now through SBA is the use of the PCR. Over the years, we have previously testified and made recommendations as for SBA to increase their budget to be able to employ more persons in this position. Yet, over the years, the number of people in this position has decreased. So we can't quite understand how in the world they're going to possibly police all of these types of transactions and make recommendations to stop the procurement before it goes through. The other part of that is, as I understand it, once they are able to identify procurement as being bundled and they want to question it, that discussion that's had with the agency's senior official or the acquisitions chief of that agency it's still no real, it seems to be still no real power from the PCR to actually stop the procurement completely. If the agency negotiates, has a discussion, and justifies, in their view, why they feel it should go forward, it seems to continue to go forward. I think that, more, there needs to be more teeth in the legislation
Correct, yes.
to provide SBA more authority to actually stop these types of procurements. And also, they've got to increase the number of persons, or we create some new position of persons to police these actions.
Sure. Well, it comes to mind sequestration and budget cuts, and both of them have consequences.
Yes.
I would like to ask the rest of the panel to comment on, we have seen that enforcement actions are rare, and there is a need for defining realistic enforcement triggers. What would you recommend to be a sufficient trigger? Any of them? Yes.
May I ask enforcement actions regarding
Those
unbundling and consolidation? Well, I'll start, Mr. Velasquez. I think we start with a clear set of standards. And right now, agencies have a lot of flexibility in making those determinations. And secondly, transparency will go a long way towards accountability. Without the real understanding, the marketplace will substantially police the federal agencies' behaviors if they know what's going on in that marketplace. And today, most companies don't have that visibility. And so the competitive marketplace, particularly as contract spending is declining, will be a very powerful force. That competition drive will be a very powerful force in helping to police the agencies. Finally, I'd suggest that we need a dependable and reliable place to challenge those actions, and OHA may very well be a good place to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Specht, we have heard from numerous small businesses about the problem of contract bundling, and each one of you made reference. As a result of that practice, subcontracting and teaming has become the best option for small businesses that are unable to perform the entirety of these massive contracts. Yet, we also heard that this process is fraught with additional costs and dangers to all parties involved. I just would like to ask you, do you believe that this is fair, that small businesses should be relegated to these positions as a result of bundling?
Thank you for the question. No, it's not fair, and it's not ideal for the federal marketplace. It's okay for small businesses to start out as subcontractors and start getting work that way because they can learn from the prime. But at some point, for their growth, it's necessary that they have direct customer contact and that they be doing work directly with the customer agency so that they can expand and learn and grow.
So do you think that there is a fear that these contracts will get so large that even the subcontracts will be out of reach to small businesses?
Absolutely. I think that these contracts get large and the items required get so diverse that you may have small businesses that are now second or third tier subcontractors. And it's just the truth of the matter that the further away you are from the federal customer, the less accountability there is, and the easier it is to squeeze those small businesses when you're at a higher tier level.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have some other question the second round. Thank you.
Mr. Burton, Mr. Specht, there's two tracks here that I see, both of them mildly conflicting but interesting to me in terms of you wanting to keep a viable supply chain. And when we want to multiply or add more small businesses, do less bundling. And how do you maintain a viable supply chain and things that we regard as necessary, say, to the national defense? And under these circumstances, we're eliminating a lot of that. And also, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is promoting small businesses, inviting them, helping them grow, helping them diversify. And we're allowing bundling to happen, which probably sends more profit to the prime, ultimately, and putting them in a position where they get beat up, frankly, for lack of a better term. But my question is, how do you maintain a viable supply chain and without doing without some kind of rules, and what kind of danger does that present? If that's a fair question, Mr. Burton.
Well, I think the rules are very important. I mean, the government operates on a whole collection of rules, and that's why I think Congress has an opportunity here to actually improve those rules with respect to consolidated contracts in particular. There's no transparency, there's no compliance, and until that is seriously taken by the agencies, I think that the industrial base is going to be weakened. Matter of fact, we already see that happening right now with respect to janitorial services. Hundreds of companies have disappeared off the federal marketplace, and more to come. And so it's a serious threat, and I'm not sure the public fully understands how serious this is. And you don't hear much about these small businesses that are actually going out of business because of the consolidated procurements and strategic sourcing, which on its face sounds so good, and yet it's clearly putting small businesses
It's almost antithetical, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mr. Speck?
So I agree with those comments. I think one of the interesting things about strategic sourcing is that we see headlines that 14 of 15 awardees are small businesses, or 86% of orders go to small businesses under some of these FSSI strategic sourcing contracts. But what we're not focused on is exactly as you said, and as Mr. Burton said, that you're focusing your industrial base on those 14 or 15 winners, and everybody else gets nothing. And so I think we need to understand that strategic sourcing can be part of the solution, but we need to have diverse orders through the supply schedules or through other ordering means that are smaller orders that can go to small businesses, that can maintain these businesses even if they don't get a strategic sourcing award.
Mr. Wynn?
Thank you. We continue to hear that I guess the rationale for strategic sourcing, bundling, is supposed to save the government money, save ultimately us, the taxpayer, money, make efficiencies, make the procurement process more efficient. But when you have hundreds of small businesses who are factored out of the process, who's measuring the total loss to those businesses, their families, and the community who they themselves are the taxpayers? So who is it that we're really trying to support here? Is it this government entity? Is it this large corporation? Or are we really about, the benefit of the people? Now, it sounds like, in essence, from the outside looking in, the government continues to function. The most we're hearing in days now is that, need for budget cuts, sequestration, this kind of thing. And so some folks probably will feel that if there's a consolidation of services, that this is a practical use of the government's time and efforts. But I don't, just like the gentleman, Mr. Speck, just said, I don't think we're emphasizing and letting the public know how many businesses are being negatively impacted by this type of process. The other thing, too, is the rules and regulations that govern these actions need to be strengthened in such a way that there's a stronger mechanism to review this process prior to the contract being awarded.
I take it everyone would agree with that. I guess I'm going to yield to Grace Meng for a question. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate all your expert insight on these issues important to our small businesses. Over the last decade in Queens, New York, nearly 65.6% of the borough's new business growth was from companies with less than 5 employees. In 2013, there were over 32,000 businesses with less than 5 employees. These small businesses, especially the ones recently created, have the potential for growth. And I want to ensure that we have policies in place to help these businesses that want to grow to reach their potential and continue contributing to our economies. In my district, especially, to be blunt, goaling is very important. These goals have afforded businesses in my district opportunities that they may otherwise have not received. Although goals are usually unenforceable targets, do you have any insight into how we can hold the SBA and other agencies more accountable to their goals?
I do think that the goals are extraordinarily important, and there's too much emphasis on dollars to small businesses. This, I think, is a serious problem, and the government needs to de-emphasize the dollars and start looking at the participation rate. You know, the objective of the Small Business Act was not just to get dollars to a few small businesses. It was to ensure maximum participation of small businesses in the Federal procurement system. That is simply in jeopardy now because of strategic sourcing and budget cuts and array of factors. But until the OMB, my former home, until OMB really at that level it indicates how important it is for SBA and the other agencies to really look at more than just dollars, I think we're going to be handicapped. And I think that this is where Congress can really play a beneficial role in getting agencies to focus on different goals besides just dollars. The participation rate, in my view, is key. How many small businesses are participating in Federal procurement?
I would second all of that and add that pressure from this committee is obviously important in focusing the higher level folks at the agencies on these small business goals. And I also think that the SBA ratings, when an agency gets an A and doesn't hit all of its small business goals, well, that's sending the wrong message, right? The message here is hit your goals, get the A. Don't hit your goals, you don't get the A, and you're going to get additional pressure. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Just as a follow-up, I think that's one reason probably for the A is that SBA was so pleased that the government as a whole made the 23% with respect to the dollars going to small businesses. It said, this is fantastic. We're going to give everybody an A across the board, even to the folks that aren't doing so well. So again, that strengthens my point that there's too much emphasis on the dollar goal.
And although not the specific topic of this hearing, I'm also interested in your views on increasing the current 20% goal at the Export-Import Bank. Do you believe that an increase in this goal would help small businesses? And also, do you believe including indirect support in the 20% goal would be detrimental to small businesses that are already receiving assistance?
I don't have enough experience with the Ex-Im Bank to have an answer for you, Ms. Meng.
Okay.
I don't have a lot of experience on the specifics regarding the Export Bank, but increasing the goals, whether it's for exports or just the goals in general, we have made recommendations previously to increase the small business goals beyond the 23% level. And also to emphasize that that's a floor, that percentage goal is a floor and not a ceiling. A lot of agencies tend to have the view that once we hit that 23%, we're there, we're great. And again, SBA then gives the agency a rating of an A. But perhaps that should be a C rating when you hit the 23%, and an A would be 50%. You know, where you've really shown and demonstrated that you've exceeded the floor of the goal. Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Cabello?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for their testimony here today. My question has to do with subcontracting. The 36% goal for subcontract set in 2009 has continuously failed to be met. In fact, over the past several years, it has declined from 35.4% in fiscal year 2010 to 34% in fiscal year 2013. Mr. Chopkin, I'm concerned that the percentage of dollars subcontracted to small business has dropped by about 3% since 2010. I'm also concerned that by holding only senior executives accountable for prime contracting goals, we've sent the message that subcontracting perhaps isn't all that important. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Mr. Corbello, thank you. Our view is subcontracting matters, and it's very important. It's a good business strategy for small businesses. We talked about that today, along with finding prime contracting opportunities. But the data and the collective insight into that small business subcontracting is sorely lacking as well. And that's an area that we have to work on before we need to be cautious in looking at root causes and in designing solutions. You may be aware a new executive branch subcontract reporting system could launch next quarter, and I'm hopeful that it will be an improvement over the current one. It has to be, although more may need to be done there. But while agencies often dictate subcontracting percentages to prime contractors, the prime contractor's choices of implementation are really part of its own technical solution that the agencies evaluate, and its business decision-making is outside the purview of the Federal agencies and the agency senior executives. So I'm concerned about imposing requirements that either can't be effectively influenced or that, if they can be influenced, that influence risk politicizing the acquisition process. So I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss that with you further after this hearing. But subcontracts matter, and we have to find a better way of identifying the right data across all of the tiers of small businesses and making sure that we're capturing that data and holding both the agencies as well as the prime contractors accountable.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, maybe you want to weigh into, in 2010, $74 billion in subcontracted dollars went to small businesses, a substantial amount of money. What can we do to make sure that our agencies pay attention to this issue?
Well, I think what you're suggesting is that agencies comply with the current rules, and I think that is absolutely critical. We are going to see more dollars going through subcontracts than previously to small businesses because of the nature of things, because of the fact that the prime contract base is going to shrink, and more small businesses are going to be eager to get subcontracting opportunities, where the government's encouraging joint ventures, teaming. You're going to see more of this. And so therefore, I think it's absolutely imperative for agencies, SBA and OMB in particular, to start emphasizing compliance with the subcontracting goals, not just meeting the prime contracting goals, but the subcontracting goals as well. There has been virtually no emphasis on meeting subcontracting goals, under the theory that small businesses would prefer to have prime contracts. But the reality is they also like to have subcontracts. And in this environment, it's critical for them to get subcontracts. I think, in short answer to your question, is that agency senior executives have to be held accountable for both achievement of prime contracting goals and subcontracting goals. Quite frankly, some senior folks in the government don't even know that there are subcontracting goals that they have to comply with. And so this is very important to have, from the top leadership down, emphasis on agencies meeting subcontracting goals.
Thank you. I have about a minute left. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this issue?
I'd like to make a quick comment about on subcontracting. You know, there's some obvious conflicts with regard to the process and the evaluation. It looks like, you know, even when we talked about the scorecard process, more emphasis is placed on the prime contracting than on the subcontracting. So if an agency, and what happens to an agency if they don't meet their subcontracting goals? We'll just not meet them again next year, perhaps. The other thing, too, though, is that with the more and more bundling and consolidation, there are fewer opportunities that are going to be had by small businesses to subcontract if more and more agencies are encouraged to use these contract vehicles. So we'd like to see more subcontracting. Businesses, small businesses want to make money. And it's the only way they're going to be able to grow and expand is that they get a contract, whether it's a subcontract or a prime. So more of that needs to be had, but the rules need to be strengthened to give them the opportunity to do so.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Chu?
Yes, Mr. Wynn, As I understand, federal agencies are required to provide the SBA statement explaining why contract bundling is necessary if it knowingly proposes a bundled acquisition. These explanations are reviewed by SBA Procurement Center representatives and can be appealed if the PCR believes that bundling is not justified. However, data shows that only 28 appeals were filed in 2012, and only 6 resulted in the unbundling of contracts. Can you explain why these numbers are so low, considering that there are millions of contracting actions that take place in a year and that many of them are bundled?
Well, I think it's partially due to the fact that it's such a few number of persons, as I mentioned, that are responsible or designated to intervene into these particular contract actions. Of the ones that they do, again, it's my understanding that, negotiations, discussions take place within the agency, and a decision is made. In some cases, the contract may be pulled back, it may be changed in some way, and then relet, and so you have fewer people challenging the award later on. But again, I just think it needs to be more people. The process needs to be strengthened for reviewing these type of actions.
Thank you. Mr. Burton, you state in your testimony that it's common for agencies not to publish timely justifications for why they're choosing to consolidate or bundle a contract, and you attribute this to the lack of regulations requiring justifications to be released on a specific timetable. And you said that SBA, therefore, has no recourse to protest a bundled contract after the contract is awarded. How does this lack of authority impact the bundling review process?
Well, again, terminology here is so very important, and we tend to speak in terms of bundled procurements, but in fact, most of the procurements that we're seeing are consolidated procurements. And the distinction is that a bundled procurement, there has to be a determination that it's unsuitable for small businesses. Well, quite frankly, small businesses can perform almost everything, especially in today's world where services is what the government is procuring, are primarily services, not big weapon systems. And so more than likely, most procurements are suitable for small businesses, which means there's not going to be a bundled procurement, which I think goes to your question, why are we seeing so few bundled procurements be challenged? Because there aren't that many bundled procurements. They're consolidated procurements, which is simply the combination of contracts which small businesses can compete for. There's no transparency. There's no requirement that, except for a written justification that's stuck in the file somewhere, there is no requirement for any posting of justifications for consolidated procurements. There's no reporting requirement for consolidated procurements. So if you're an agency official, you're going to want to make sure that we're doing consolidated procurements. I mean, it's somewhat of a cynical view, but I think it's true that if you decide that it's a bundled procurement, there's more regulation and more red tape. So, and I think, quite frankly, most procurements are consolidated. I think they're justifiably categorized as such. That's why I think it's so important for Congress to start having those transparency requirements imposed on consolidated contracts. And maybe we should even quit using the word bundled, because there's just not much in that category. It's consolidated procurements, and there's no transparency or regulatory requirements except for a mere written justification, and which I testified that when we've submitted FOIA requests to agencies to take a look at those written justifications, they're not to be found. And in my view, they were never done. And so I think it's absolutely critical that Congress, OMB, SBA start saying it's very important that we have transparency into consolidated procurements.
Such a good point. Mr. Specht, the SBA weighs 80% of its scorecard grade on prime contracting dollars, yet only 10% on subcontracting achievements. Do you believe the disparity between the weight of these two types of contracts should be this drastic?
Absolutely not. As Mr. Wynn pointed out, small businesses want to make money, and it is probably for the best that they be prime contractors, probably the best circumstance for them, but it's not 8 times better than being a subcontractor. And so, no, I don't think that that weighting makes sense. I think that more weight should be placed on subcontracting. And in addition, I think this point's been made that our transparency into the actual percentages that get subcontracted to small businesses is not very good, so we should put those two together. More weight in the scorecard on small business subcontracting, but also more transparency so we know that it's actually getting done.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Lawrence?
Thank you, Chair, for holding this hearing. In Michigan, the state of Michigan, we're home to over 800, 500 small businesses, and we employ over 1.7 million. In the first quarter of 2014 alone, over 11,000 small new businesses were established. Were established, and it is my sincere hope that all of them stay in business and grow. I hear a lot from the panel today about transparency. And my question, in that there's a need for transparency, so I have 2 questions. What are some of the major challenges that these new small businesses will face when they compete against the more established small businesses with a history of consolidating and bundling? And then I want to hear from you as experts, what does transparency look like? When you use that word as if it's it defines something, and I would just like for you to state what would transparency and what would those areas be that would give us the transparency that you feel we would need? And Mr. Burton, if you could start. Well,
small businesses do have an opportunity to challenge certain actions. They can challenge certain things before OHA, for example. They can challenge at the GAO. They do have recourse, but they simply have no recourse if there's no transparency or view into the government decision-making process. A perfect example was recently I had a small business client who felt like they should have won an award, and we had a debriefing by the agency, and the debriefing said, you were great, there was no deficiencies, your price was reasonable, realistic. And so they thought, well, I guess I should have gotten the award. So they filed a protest only to find out when we look behind the curtain and look at the government decision-making process, we find out that the particular contractor's price was way high. It was off the charts. Had the agency communicated that basic fact that your price was not really reasonable or realistic, there wouldn't have been a bid protest. Small businesses have thirst for information, and that's just one example where the agency, for whatever reason, just doesn't want to share that information. With respect to the decision-making process on why an agency consolidates a procurement, when they consolidate a procurement, they're supposed to go through a decision-making process. Will this negatively impact small business if I consolidate this procurement? In many instances, it will. But there's no analysis, even though it's required, there's no analysis, no documentation regarding that. If there's not even documentation regarding it, we never get to transparency because there's nothing to look at. But transparency into the decision-making process, there has to be a document that we can take a look at and small businesses can actually challenge. That is so critical for the health of the small business industrial base.
Other panelists, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Ms. Lawrence. First of all, I say all too often that the only thing worse than not having a government contract is having a government contract, because the compliance burdens, particularly for small businesses, are significant and very, very different than what they experience in the commercial marketplace. And for many, it is a real wake-up call and a real business risk, because the government does look at and challenge the compliance capabilities of firms. So even for small businesses, even selling commercial items, even on a fixed price basis, the rules that are imposed on prime contractors and often flow down to subcontractors can be significant and very atypical for what they're used to in the normal marketplace. And I think on the question of transparency, what does it look like? I think it looks like 3 things. First of all, clear documentation about what an agency's decision-making is. Secondly, compliance with the existing rules And many times we find that the agencies are ignoring or skirting those existing rules. So as Mr. Britton said, they never get to the documentation. And finally, senior level accountability for those activities. I think with those three piece parts together, there'll be lots of attention to in the marketplace, and the competitive marketplace will help drive compliance, because the companies themselves or advocates on their behalf will be watching how agencies are performing.
And I'll just add, as someone who represents small businesses in your state, that one of the primary challenges those businesses face is knowing about these opportunities, knowing how to get into the government contracting marketplace, and finding contracts of the size that they can handle at an early stage, so they can grow and they can build up the compliance regime and all the rest.
And just a quick follow-up on the transparency and small businesses succeeding in the federal marketplace. The transparency needs to be readily available for those of us out here to be able to see it. So whatever the decision-making process that they use, if they would make it readily available so that we can see it. There was an executive order at one time with regard to the increased opportunities for service-disabled vets that every agency would post on its website what the opportunities were, what the plan was to how they were going to increase opportunities for this group of businesses. That went well for a couple of years, and then we ended up into the scorecard thing where now it's less transparent. So, thank you.
Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you. I'm going to open another round of questioning if no one minds. I'll start myself with some interesting and bad news. The SBA gave a buyout to many of its procurement center reps, which tells us that they're moving away from what we want, not towards it, right? The other thing is, I think all of you are much kinder than you need to be over this. What's obvious from listening to you is that what we have here is a small war or maybe a large war of attrition, that the difficulty associated with doing what we want people to do is high. And the ease of bundling and consolidation is just that, easy. And that it requires a great deal of effort to do what we're asking and expecting and have a right to expect some of these agencies to do. So, and they act with impunity. There are no consequences. Apparently the appeal process is all but non-existent. Our ability to monitor and understand is obfuscated by the fact that there are no reporting requirements, with my friend Grace Meng is trying to address. Knowing some contracting officers, as I do in my past life, it doesn't necessarily have to be insidious, but the outcome is the same. Do you agree with that? I mean, I'm making a kind of blanket statement about the agencies and the personalities and the people that run them, but I welcome you pushing back or just your kind of personal opinion. But a lot of this boils down to personalities and people and the workload they have or don't have, and their willingness to look at something like this and say, oh, this is a bunch of baloney, I'm not going to go through with it, and by the way, nobody's going to do anything to me for doing it. So you're shaking your head there, Mr. Shavotkin. Go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of comments, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I think it's important to understand that the primary goal for the acquisition professionals in the agency is to acquire the goods and services they need to fulfill their agency mission. The acquisition system, the procurement process, is an enabler. It's not an end state in and of itself. So many of these requirements, in fact, inhibit, from the agency's views, their ability to, in a timely manner, get the goods and services they need. When you couple that with little clear regulations and little oversight, it is very easy to divert attention from these set of compliance rules and focus attention.
Sure, but you have to agree that the loss of 100,000 businesses in such a small period of time suggests that it's a crisis, not just.
Except that the agencies are still getting, by and large, still getting what they need from the marketplace, but not from those small businesses. And that's why the comment earlier from all of us was it's important to focus not just on the dollars, but on the whole industrial base, the repetitive ability of the agencies to get goods and services from a diverse capability rather than just from a limited number that are achieving the dollars. Couple that with the workforce challenges in the federal marketplace, the skills of the current acquisition workforce, and the drive towards low price, all of these things end up having an impact on who's able to be a supplier to the federal government and how the government approaches that marketplace.
So you think there's some basic flaw in the process that could be dealt with? I mean, what you're saying is they're trying to do their job, and all these requirements, quotas, goals of the small business SBA are actually kind of counterintuitive to them.
No, that's not my point. I think these goals have a value to the agencies. They draw attention, and there is every reason to continue to support a robust small business program. Unfortunately, I think, as I alluded to in my testimony, maybe I said more explicitly in my written testimony, the focus has been only on on dollar achievement, and many agencies are using those goals as a way of establishing an industrial policy, picking winners and losers in the marketplace without regard to long-term impact of the industrial base. Reporting will help. Greater visibility into the entire supply chain, as you suggested, will be a help. But we just need to remember that the purpose of the acquisition system is to acquire those goods and services for the agencies.
But it's not the only purpose.
But it's not the only purpose.
Anyone else?
Well, I guess my perspective on it is that we're all talking about the stick, but maybe there's some carrot to be had, which is to say that what you could do is make sure that small business participation is one of the most important factors in a best value trade-off in procurements going forward, so that you incentivize large contractors to go out and find small businesses and find diverse small businesses to meet those needs. And so that's not a perfect solution, but it is a way to sort of push them, to incentivize them to do that. I think the other perspective is that I think many in the agencies see the small business goals as a hassle. As something that is extraneous to their day job, which is buying things for the federal government. And the solution to that is to continue to evangelize about how small businesses not only add jobs and add value in the country, but also can offer unique needs, can offer better customer service, and can be a great asset for a buyer.
I would just add that let's not overlook the realities of the everyday working citizen, particularly within the federal marketplace. And that is that I want to do not as much as I can do, but only what I'm required or have to do for real. And that means that if we've got fewer and fewer procurement officials, contracting officers, and where now the workload on me to get the same amount of goods and services and requirements done for my agency still exists, but it's fewer people to do them. If there's a way that I could consolidate these requirements and do fewer actions, I mean, for real, that's what the officer is going to do. But see, they're only doing that because they're allowed to do it. It's justified under the current state regulations. If the regulations, the laws, rules change, then they couldn't do that because they would be in violation. So it's incumbent upon you, upon Congress, that we really look at ways to change the way that they actually do what they do.
So
because
the appeal process that we're talking about here today, and transparency that we're talking about, and the requirement of explanations in advance and concurrent with awards and decisions and procurement, just those two items alone would go a long way.
it would go along with it. Yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important to note that priorities are important. The workforce is overburdened. It's shrinking. 40% of the federal workforce has less than 5 years' experience. There's no question that there's huge challenges that may never be overcome in that area. But that's even why it's more important for Congress and others in leadership positions to clarify what is most important. And I do believe, with respect to the goaling, that we have a misplaced emphasis really on the dollars going to small business, and a greater emphasis should be placed on actually how many small businesses are participating in the Federal procurement process, and how strong is our small business industrial base. I think the emphasis needs to be more now on participation rate than actual dollars. And I know when I worked at the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, we were very focused on the dollars because we thought that's what was important to Congress and to the administration. And so consequently, that is the message that we sent to the agencies, to focus on the dollars. That message can change, and the emphasis can change through leadership and through rules.
Sure. But that's so subjective. I mean, what supply chain is more important than another supply chain? Who makes that decision, and how do you talk about it? And how do you protect it, and how do you justify spending more when maybe you could spend less? Because the dollar is the only thing that's truly measurable for most of us.
Well, and the numbers of small businesses participating, I mean, I think that's measurable as well.
That'd be one thing, certainly. Anyone else? I'll take a little liberty. I'm the last guy here, so. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just second Mr. Burton's point in terms of diversity, and I do think that is measurable in terms of not only the subcategory goals but the numbers of businesses, because eventually what's going to happen if we keep consolidating contracts like this is that only the large smalls will survive. They'll be acquired by large businesses that want access to those contracts, and you're going to see an even more steep drop off in the number of small business participants, and those that you have will be stuck in second, third tier subcontract roles. And that is a significant problem that I think it partially can be addressed by forcing justifications to be published, not only for bundling, but I think Mr. Burton says for consolidated contracts, because consolidated contracts don't require the same justifications, and they're just easier. You have one small business that gets the work now on a multiple award contract, as opposed to the dozens that used to have them, and you don't have to publish justification. And the publication will allow, to some extent, the private bar to step in and try to be private attorneys general, right, and try to enforce these things. The downside of that is, as I mentioned in my testimony, that those protests don't go anywhere. And I think one of the reasons why you see so few bundling appeals, even internally, is that the bundling standards are not very high. If I can demonstrate a 5% savings, I can bundle. Well, the Congress needs to decide, is 5% the right number? At what cost our industrial base, right? And if the number is 5%, that's great. But if it's not, then we need to increase that. We need to increase the cost of bundling contracts.
But also, the 5% has to be justified by itself, so that would help. Just having the ability to look at that number and question the veracity of it would go a long way, which we don't have, as everyone's pointed out. I think I'd ask that you watch the work of this committee over the next few weeks, couple of weeks. These are the issues that we're dealing with. We have work that we're proposing that we'd ask you, if you can, take a look at, give us some feedback. Some of it's already been written. And I want to thank you for being here. You've all done a great job of explaining your case. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit their supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned. And again, thank you.